Dating when you are a man over 50 can be a lot of fun, but also come with a lot of challenges, whether you live in America or Europe or right here in Southeast Asia. So I'm going to give you 5 tips that will help you enjoy it, or at the very least help you avoid hating it, which a lot of men around the world do. Before I go any further, I just want to mention that a lot of things that I cannot say in this video because this video will get banned on most social media. So I have a free newsletter that I send out where I say things that I actually want to say. So go to themillionmanproject.com and sign up. All right, number 1, and I hate to tell you this, but you can no longer date the best looking women in the world, which is women in their 20s. Now, if you're still able to get a date with a girl who is in her 20s, kudos. I know that feels great. Right here in Southeast Asia and other countries, it's not a big deal. But we're talking about serious dating. Yeah, no, not anymore. Now listen, you can still play around and have friends with benefits and whatever. That's fine. That keeps you young. But if we're talking about serious dating, no. There are a few huge reasons for that. First of all, the generational gaps nowadays are bigger than ever because the life moves very quickly and these gaps grow. So if you're in your 50s or 60s, a girl in her 20s, you guys are on 2 different planets, way too far to have an actual future together. Number 2, as a man in your 50s and 60s, you want to marry a girl, or at least have a life partner that is stable. And women in their 20s are literally the opposite of that. And it's not necessarily their fault because some of them don't know what their careers are going to be like. Some of them don't know if they're actually going to want or not want to have kids. And a lot of them will not know whether or not they're just going to get fat. I hate to tell you this, but you know what happens a lot of times to women who look amazing in their 20s, all of a sudden in their 30s, and you know, that happens, and I don't think you want that. And you know, just even the way it looks, I know you're not supposed to care about this, but you know, do you really want to be with a girl who's visually like technically can be your granddaughter? It always is what it looks like. And I personally would pass on that. So, which brings me to the women in their 30s and 40s. As I mentioned before, and this is common knowledge if you're honest with yourself, you know, the women in their 30s and 40s are going to be on a decline in terms of their looks. However, there are plenty of them who actually take care of themselves. If you like plastic surgery, there's that. I personally don't, but it is an option. Now, the good thing about it is that, you know, if whatever shape a girl is in her 30s and 40s, that's pretty much very close to the final product. So that's very important, at least to me. Also, these girls are relatively settled on their views of the world. You know, whether or not they want to have kids. Some of them already had kids, and obviously I would never encourage anybody who is looking for a serious relationship to date single mothers. But if a girl is in her 40s and she had a kid in her 20s, well, that kid is out of the house. And, you know, if you're a guy in your 50s and 60s, you know, I'd say absolutely go for it, as long as the kids are out of the house and have their own lives, and this girl is essentially a single girl with no kids again. Also, as much as I don't really understand when men say, well, I wanna have deep conversations with my wife, I don't get that. But if you want to have a conversation that's just not retarded every other time, you know, then the women in their 30s and 40s are great because they've established their brains have already formed, unlike women in their 20s, right? So there are tons and tons of benefits of dating someone who, you know, essentially knows what she's all about, but also what she wants. And this brings me to probably one of the most important points here. You know, these women, they've had good relationships, they've had bad relationships, they also got some sexual experience, so they know what they want, they know how to get along with the men. A lot of times, I'm generalizing, but the chances are much higher. And honestly, they're just better in bed. I live here in Southeast Asia, and so, hooking up with a girl who's in her 20s that has a body count of 1 or 2 or 3, that's great on paper, right? But in reality, no, no. So overall, if you are in your 50s or 60s and you're dating, listen, let's live in reality. If you're truly, truly looking for a life partner, start shifting your mind. Start looking at women in their 30s and 40s. In some ways, they're easier to find. In other ways, they're harder to find. But at this point, at this day and age, finding a wife material girl, even here in Southeast Asia, believe it or not, is a challenge. So as always, I recommend that you live your awesome, amazing life for yourself. And if there is a girl who wants to become a guest, a permanent guest in your life, that's great. But counting on it or needing a wife, you can want a wife, but needing a wife, you have some work to do. You need to be fully satisfied with your single life first before you can find her. All right, now let's talk about some dating options, which again have just plummeted everywhere in the world. So it is much harder to navigate. And of course, especially with women in their 30s and 40s, they kind of divided to two main categories, which you would probably want to avoid. One, women who want your money, and that's pretty much it. They are much easier to recognize because they're not really hiding it anymore, because there's so many simps and beta males that are happy to bring the money to them. But there are also women who, don't need no man. Because they're either making their own money or they think that they're princesses because they have a lot of likes and matches on dating apps and social media, where in reality none of those men really would ever be serious with these women. The reality right now is, and that's no different for women in their 30s and 40s, though some are starting to recognize that time is ticking. And it is much harder to find a good man. And a lot of men are still going for women in their 20s. So they have to be a little more careful. So, you want to avoid those two categories, but they're much easier to recognize. And of course, there is ghosting, which is kind of unfortunately infected the majority of the population of this planet. I think older men like myself take it much more personal because it is much more disrespectful, has always been much more disrespectful. It's a very recent thing that people just walk away from a conversation. I've actually been ghosted in person by a woman. Now, it was my fault because I started talking to a Western woman right here in Thailand. That's a big no-no. You always want to ignore them. But I ended up at the mixer talking to one. She appeared to be very nice, and she literally ghosted me in person. Older women also recognize that this man is probably more stable, probably much more hardworking. So they're starting to look at the money as sort of a man having a good list of good characteristics that essentially made him make decent money. You don't have to be a multimillionaire. And here in Southeast Asia, you can just be well off and be rich essentially, because the cost of living here is much lower. But if a woman is looking at you as a stable man who works very hard, that is okay. And it's usually older women who recognize that in a man when he has money, rather than thinking, oh, there's a Chanel purse right there. Now, we already talked about single mothers. There's obviously going to be more and more women in their 30s and 40s who have kids. But if these kids are grown, that the chances are much higher of that, are no longer single mothers per se. Those kids are out of the house because the kids are gone, and then we're fine. Now, women believe that they should have higher standards because they might have careers or they don't have time to fuck around anymore, or they have their own money. None of those things are obviously, as we men know, add any value to that. As a matter of fact, if a woman has a career or a lot of money, that's really a deal breaker. But a lot of these women think that they deserve the most favorite word of modern women, more, even though they're older now. You got to stay away from those women because obviously you will find more of women like that with higher standards because they think they're worth more in their 30s and 40s. So stay the fuck away from them. Let's talk about your appearance. That is very, very important and the easiest thing to change. And this is what I recommend to all of you watching this video, because it is becoming easier and easier when you're older. A lot of men simply just give up. You don't see that many, good-looking men who are fit in their 40s and 50s because they gave up, and very few men who haven't. Now, if you're one of those men who give up, you can still change that. And there are several ways how to do it. Now, obviously, diet and exercise. Honestly, that shouldn't just be for the appearance. That should just be so your quality of life is not going down as drastically as it is for many people. A lot of men live out their last 2 or 3 decades as a vegetable, essentially, right? Their health is always bad. They're going from one doctor to another, from one problem to another. The quality of life is low, and just that alone should be a motivation for you to exercise, to eat better, and so forth and so forth. But also the appearance. Again, if you are a relatively fit guy in your 50s and 60s, the competition just goes down drastically just because of that. Secondly, let's talk about style. And that's your hair, your facial hair, and the way you dress. Even an umbrella that you carry with you. Like, for example, I have an umbrella that goes well with my shoes because it has a wooden handle, and I wear cowboy boots a lot of times, even though I am here in 100 Fahrenheit degree weather in Thailand. Style comes first. But, first of all, don't look like an 11-year-old boy like most men. That already will make you look better and appear better to women, especially older women who are looking for a man who can dress himself. I mean, look at the majority of men nowadays. Baggy shorts, sandals over socks, doesn't even matter over what, sandals, baggy t-shirt or polo shirt, that little gay little purse that men wear nowadays. That is not attractive to women. A woman wants to see a well-dressed man. And there are different accessories that you can do to that. You can have a hat, you can wear different types of sports jackets or vests and stuff like that. Honestly, there's tons of YouTube channels who will teach you how to do that, but just not looking like a homeless person or an 11-year-old boy should already help you in your appearance and essentially give you style. Will give you style, but it also will give you you will look distinguished, because most of men in any country don't give a shit anymore. But you should. First thing you want to start with, just your home. Because when you invite a woman into your home, she can identify a lot of problems right away, but also can see a lot of positives. For example, my home, one thing that people will always say, and especially women, is like, wow, this is so clean. And a clean man who's even a toilet bowl is just spotless. That goes a long way if you're clean. Now, you should be a clean man just for yourself, but it goes a long way when a woman sees that your apartment does not look like a college dorm, but looks like an apartment or a house of a grown-ass man. And a lot of men unfortunately fail at that. But even how you talk and how you walk, how you present yourself, all of that is important. So if you haven't thought about it, do think about it. So make sure that overall your lifestyle is a lifestyle of a grown-ass man, because that is attractive to women. And it really has nothing to do with your appearance, if you will, but definitely everything to do with the appeal and the competition that really does not exist if you do those few simple things. All right, number 4, the relationship needs. When a man is in his 50s and 60s, he's no longer goes like, yeah, I don't care, I don't have a type, whatever. No, we usually have a type, which is much easier to identify, right? If you're a boob man or ass man or a leg man and so forth, whether it's important to you or not important to you, but also, whether or not a girl is toned. This is something that men in their 20s and 30s don't really think a lot about, but now we do, so we have a type. That's very important, because it's easier to find when you know what it is that you're looking for, right? Also, quality of sex. Now, I got to tell you, men in their 20s and 30s usually don't even know what a good sex is. But if you're in your 50s and 60s, you know. And also, you are much better at it, right? All of the things that women complain that younger men don't do, last longer, be more patient, be more attentive, we love to do, right? If you don't, it's time to catch up. But this way, you can also find better sex partners, which again, I know this whole red pill movement says, oh, you want virgins, you want girls with a low body count. I disagree. I think if I'm looking for a wife, I want her to be amazing in bed. And the only way how you get amazing at anything is experience. Now, don't overdo it, obviously. Also have her checked out, right? You always want to have the test. But at the end of the day, I feel like it's much easier to find a better quality sex when you are an older man. As important as it is to know what you want, it is even more important to know what you absolutely don't want to have in your life. It is better to die alone and live alone than to live your life with a woman who will essentially poison it little by little. I mean, tell me in the comment section, how many men that you know that got together with a fun, positive, good girl, or maybe not even from the very beginning, and then slowly she just absolutely destroyed his life little by little to the point where he didn't even notice because it was just little by little and he allowed more and more and more. And now his life is just absolute nightmare. And yet he doesn't even know that he can wake up. So absolutely have your own list of deal breakers, red flags, whatever you want to call it. Obviously things like tattoos, nose rings, kids that are not out of the house yet, careers, crazy exes, any type of mental health issues, all should be on that list, but at least have that list. And that's the advantage of having one because of your experience. Now, another thing that, the positive here as far as knowing your relationship needs is concerned is that the looks just don't matter as much anymore. Of course, you want a sexy, good-looking girl who you're attracted to, but as life went on, you realize that if you're going to have a life partner, there are many, many other things that matter even more sometimes. That's what makes it easier to identify the right girl. All right, now let's talk about where to meet. And of course, we're going to start with dating apps. Honestly, they're just not worth your time. Yeah, if you want to hook up, if you want a friend with benefits, yeah, I guess you can still use them. The only dating apps that I would suggest you can still kind of sort of utilize are niche dating apps. Like here in Southeast Asia, specifically here in Thailand, we have a couple of apps that are specifically for dating in Thailand, and they're okay. If you have some sort of a kink, there are some kink apps. If you want to meet a girl based on your sexual kink or whatever, not a bad idea at all. You can meet there, kind of start mainly with sex, but with an idea of growing this into a relationship. That's perfectly fine. But if we're talking about Tinder and Bumble, they're nothing but they're just there to supply women with two things that they are hopelessly addicted to, which is, of course, money and attention and validation. That's it. You're not going to find a wife on Tinder or Bumble just because as soon as the girl gets, let's say it's for the first time she just got on Tinder, the attention from simps and beta males, you cannot win. You cannot win if a woman is looking for attention and money. You cannot win against simps because they will absolutely out-simp you even if you try. And why would you want women who are looking for simps? So let's forget about dating apps. Please do with those exceptions. Now, the second one is social circles. And of course, as we grow older, a lot of these social circles disappear. If you were playing hockey or soccer or football or whatever, and you don't anymore because you're older, that disappeared. Some activities, a lot of your friends maybe in different interest groups are no longer there because they got married and got kids and died inside and all of that stuff. So this is something that you actually have to create. And you would create it by, you know, having a life of your own, meaning there's got to be activities that you enjoy. So if you like going to the gym, you know, don't have a gym in your house. Don't even go to your apartment gym if you have one. Go to a gym where you will meet, you know, women who are fit. Now, I know women have ruined even that. But nowadays, because things are really reversing, a lot of men just don't want to talk to women, especially in gyms, because they don't, you know, that creates an opportunity. What I would also recommend, you know, instead of just, you know, maybe running on a treadmill or just cycling by yourself, go and take a cycling class or a yoga or Zumba class. Those classes are like 80-90% women. You know, easy. You will make friends or acquaintances or meet a lot of women just because that's who comes to those classes. A lot of women are looking for men nowadays at the grocery stores, Home Depot and stuff like that. So be there looking good, dressed well, having a style, but at the same time, again, let women do a lot of work as well. You don't want to be approaching women who don't want to be approached, but I feel like they're very easy to spot. So, you know, and recognize the spots where women are not. So if you like playing computer games, you shouldn't if you're a man in their 50s or 60s, you know, but don't go to the arcades and places where just no women come to, okay? Sports bars, no woman comes there by herself unless she already has a man or a drinking problem. All right, once again, a quick reminder that there are a few things in this video that I cannot say. YouTube, TikTok will simply kick me out. So sign up for the newsletter, as I mentioned earlier, themillionmanproject.com. That link is in the bio. So you can actually hear those thoughts of mine as well, which you can argue are the most important ones. Also, if there's something that I missed in this video, please, you know, ask a question or just suggest something in the comments, because I will make a video just based on that, as I've done before. Otherwise, see you guys next time. Peace.